I had no idea how many crystal shops were in Sedona.
No, and I'm glad you let me stop by because I wanted to get this piece of petrified wood. Arizona is famous for its petrified wood, and it's part of what we need to discuss here.
Well, when we were talking about isotopes, one of the things we didn't address was the whole area of carbon-14. I mean, most people are familiar, and yet I'm not sure we know exactly what that is. Can you describe that?
Well, first of all, we need to clear up a confusion. Most people think that radiocarbon has been used to date rocks. Whenever they think of radioactive dating, they think of radiocarbon because that's what they're used to hearing. But radiocarbon isn't used to date rocks because most rocks don't have carbon in them. And what we need is organic carbon because it's intrinsic to the methodology or how you understand how radiocarbon works.
How does a tree then get carbon-14 in it?
Well, it's simple because the radiocarbon is produced in the upper atmosphere. Cosmic rays bombarding the Earth's atmosphere turns nitrogen atoms into carbon-14 atoms, which circulates into the carbon dioxide that we breathe. And so it's also taken in by the plants during photosynthesis. So it's in the wood, it's in the leaves, it's in the vegetables we eat. Animals take it into their bodies, so it's in the animals that we eat. So it gets into our bodies. So not only are all these plants around us radioactive with radiocarbon, but we are ourselves.
So you have it, I have it.
Correct. And as long as we live, we're taking more radiocarbon into our bodies. But when we die, we stop taking radiocarbon into our bodies. And so a dinosaur dies, it stops taking in radiocarbon, and then over the thousands of years, it's getting less and less radiocarbon. And as I said before, after 90,000 years, there should be no radiocarbon left in dinosaur bones. If every atom of the Earth was radiocarbon, it all would have decayed away in less than 1 million years. So if you already believe the fossils, dinosaur fossils, the coal beds, all those things are millions of years old, you wouldn't expect to find any radiocarbon in them. And yet you do. And this is one of the things that we found when we studied petrified wood like this at different levels in the geologic record. I was doing research on this. I was collecting samples in England, in Australia, and I sent them to the radiocarbon laboratories, and sure enough, they had radiocarbon in them. So this is another aspect of this whole time question, because if these things are believed to be millions of years old, like this petrified wood, and yet it has radiocarbon in it that says it's only thousands of years old, then it means that it calls into question the conventional time frame. And so we wanted to test this because we'd seen in the literature, this is in the conventional literature. In the 1980s, they developed a new methodology for measuring radiocarbon. They could count atoms of radiocarbon. That's how good it was. But they wanted to be sure that they weren't getting any contamination in their laboratories. And so they took samples like petrified wood, they took samples of dinosaur bones and coal and oil and natural gas and limestone even, and they put them in their equipment, and every sample they tested had radiocarbon in it. And this was reported in the literature, and they ignored it. So in our research, we decided, well, we'll test that for ourselves. We wanted to be sure that this wasn't an artifact of the conventional experimental method. So we selected samples from 10 different coal beds around the United States, some coal beds that were conventionally as young as 40 million years, some coal beds that were conventionally over 300 million years old. And when we tested them for radiocarbon, they had radiocarbon in them, and they all yielded the same radiocarbon age, which meant that these plants must have all lived at the same time and died at the same time. And that fits the flood paradigm because these would have been pre-flood trees that were all buried together at the same time. But we went further. We thought, okay, let's test out some material that's come from inside the Earth that's got carbon in it. So we selected diamonds because diamonds come from deep inside the Earth. Remember the volcano that we were at?
Yes.
The SP crater? Well, from inside the Earth, we have these volcanic eruptions that bring diamonds up. They're made down deep inside the Earth, which means the diamonds have never been in contact with the atmosphere until they're brought to the surface. Because carbon-14 is produced in the atmosphere, we wouldn't expect them to have any radiocarbon in them. because also they're the hardest substance known, so they can't be contaminated. So even when they arrive at the Earth's surface, you're not going to exchange carbon-14 in the atmosphere with carbon in the diamond. So whatever the diamond brought up from the depth has been bottled up and locked in. So we tested the diamonds. We got several diamonds from Africa, and every one of those diamonds yielded radiocarbon at much the same age. It was detectable radiocarbon. Now, we presented this research at a conference, the American Geophysical Union, one of the largest bodies of geologists that get together. We had a poster presentation, and unbeknownst to us, one of the scientists that saw our presentation of the diamond evidence was from a radiocarbon laboratory. So he went back to his own university radiocarbon laboratory, got his own diamonds, and reported similar results to what we had found. Here's the sticking point. The diamonds are supposed to be between 1 and 3 billion years old. That's the conventional age. For them to be only thousands of years old flies in the face of the conventional wisdom. So when they published their results, what did they say? They tried to put it down to machine error, which of course is ludicrous, because even if you have no sample in your machine, have nothing in the machine, you won't get any radiocarbon. So if it was machine error, you'd expect it to show up radiocarbon when there was nothing in there. When you put the diamond in, it shows detectable radiocarbon, and it's been reproduced. So again, this is an illustration. You know, we did our own sampling, got our own laboratory results, and verified what was already in the open scientific literature for several decades, whether it's petrified wood, coal, dinosaur bones, the shells of shellfish, they all contain radiocarbon, all through the fossil record. And so that tells us that these layers aren't millions of years old.
Well, that brings us back again to the issue of the power of a paradigm. That if evidence doesn't fit in your paradigm, we have a tendency to discard it or ignore it.
Exactly. Yeah, it's like having a set of blinkers. I'm only going to believe what I see that fits in with what I already believe. And anything outside that's considered anomalous, I'll just shelve it as a tiny mystery and ignore it. And yet, the more that a paradigm is challenged, the more likelihood that there could be a switch, unless, of course, there's a spiritual dimension. And because, let's be honest, when we're talking about radiocarbon, these radiocarbon results, we're talking about an Earth that's only thousands of years old. We're talking about trees being buried in coal beds all in the 1 year during the flood. That's why they gave the same age. Then that's radically different from the conventional paradigm. They've excluded God from the picture. As soon as they have to admit that maybe the Bible is correct, that the flood paradigm of Earth history, the Genesis paradigm of Earth history is the correct view, then the Genesis paradigm includes a creator God to whom man is accountable. And that's why there's a spiritual dimension to it. And that's why they can deliberately choose to ignore the evidence, which is what the Apostle Peter said in 2 Peter chapter 3. They'll be willingly ignorant. It's not that the evidence isn't there, it's that they've chosen to ignore it.
Yeah.